Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf begins with a Mishnah, and it also ends the 8th parak of Pesachim and begins the 9th. So the last Mishnah in the 8th parak of Pesachim discusses situations in which somebody is not fitting to be counted amongst the carbon during the day of Erev Pesach, but by nightfall he will, and there are potential rabbinical issues. So the Mishnah will say who can do something about it and what he can do about it. The Gemara will focus on somebody who's converting on Erev Pesach itself, it will be ready to eat the carbon at night. Then the Gemara discusses when you have a potential Isser D'Rabbanan, when do we allow it to interfere with the carbon, and when do we say no, the Isser D'Rabbanan should not be allowed to interfere with the carbon Pesach. Then we will begin the 9th parak, which we will preview at that time. So the Mishnah begins and it says that there are a couple of situations where somebody is not ready for a carbon Pesach during the day. He will be ready at night, but there's a couple of things he has to do. And the examples are as follows. There's somebody who is an oinaim, that is that he has a close family member who died and has not been buried yet. So he is not ready for the carbon during the day. He's not allowed to eat kachim when he's an oinaim. However, the status of aninus only exists during the day. There is no aninus at night, mid-d'oraisa, like the pasuk where Aaron HaKohen lost his children, and therefore he could not eat kachim. He said, should I be eating kachim hayoim? V'achalti chatas hayoim ha'ita v'nei Hashem. Should I be eating today? But by nightfall, he's allowed to mid-d'oraisa. There is an issue, however, d'Rabbanan, he's not allowed to. So the Mishnah says what he should do is as follows. He should go to the mikvah, and then he can eat the carbon Pesach at night, but not kachim. The Gemara explains he needs to go to the mikvah because anybody who's prevented from eating carbon Pesach during the day should go to the mikvah, even though he's not tamei, to symbolically show that his preventing state is ending at nightfall. He should go to the mikvah just like a tful yoim, or somebody who's mechuzer kippurim would need to go to the mikvah. Mechuzer kippurim, as we said again, means that he needs to bring a carbon on Erev Pesach, and he's not tahar until nightfall. He should go to the mikvah so that he could show that he's doing this extra step to be mitahar himself, to make himself ready. So even though again he's not tamei, symbolically he goes to the mikvah to make himself ready, to show that he's ending the state of puzzle for carbon, and now he's kosher for carbon. So he does have to go to the mikvah, but he is able to eat the carbon at night, and he's included in the carbon during the day. Why there's still aninas d'Rabbanan? He's still an oinaim d'Rabbanan. So the Rabbanan did not prevent you from eating a carbon Pesach. They canceled it because eating a carbon Pesach is a mitzvah, that if somebody does not do it, he gets kares, therefore it's very severe. The Rabbanan did not interfere with that. However, other kachim, those mitzvah daraisa to eat kachim, it's not a chiyuv, it's not time-bound necessarily, sometimes it is, but often it's not, and there's no kares involved, and therefore the oinain is not allowed to eat other kabbanas at night, midrabanan, even though he is not an oinain daraisa, he is an oinain midrabanan. Next case the Mishnah discusses is a shemea mesai, somebody who hears about a close relative who died, but it's long after he died. The avelus is already over, the burial already happened, but he is just heard. Now the halacha is that he's an avel d'Rabbanan. The Rabbanan said he should be an avel for 1 day. Similar to that is somebody who the remains of his parents or one of them is being moved. Malaket etzamas, it's being moved from one place to another, or it's being gathered up. There also there is a velus d'Rabbanan on that day. He's an avel midrabanan. Now an avel is not allowed to eat kachim, but over here, since the whole avelus is only d'Rabbanan, they allowed him to eat kachim and certainly the carbon Pesach at night, again, by going to the mikvah symbolically to show that the status that forbids you is being ended and completed by nightfall. Okay, the next case is a ger, somebody who converted. So the Gemara says this is a machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says he could go to the mikvah and eat his carbon Pesach at night. By night he's a full-fledged Jew, same as everybody else. Beis Hillel says no. Somebody who leaves his orla, he leaves the foreskin behind, is considered as if he becomes tamei, and he needs to have the sprinkling of the paraduma on the 3rd and the 7th day, just like somebody who's tamei mace. Therefore, this guy, even though he converted and by Pesach night is a full-fledged Jew, he's considered to be tamei midirabanan, and we do not allow him to eat from the carbon because of his tumah status. Now the Gemara explains that Beis Hillel only says that about a guy who's converting and having his bris milah. A Jew who's having a bris milah didn't have his bris milah, there Beis Hillel would not say he becomes tamei. What's the reason? It's not that Beis Hillel really holds that the orla, the foreskin, is tamei, and by leaving it, it's matameim. Beis Hillel has Gzeira derabanan. We are afraid that the guy will be tamei next year, tamei meis, just before Pesach. And we're afraid that he's really tamei meis now, when he's converting. The thing is as follows. A guy has no tumas meis. It doesn't apply to him. So even if he touched the mace the day before he converted, he's tahar, and we would allow him technically to eat from the carbon. The problem is that he'll learn from that next year when he is really tamei because he touched the mace the day before, he will consider himself to be tahar as well. He'll say, look, last year I touched the mace the day before the carbon Pesach was brought, and they let me eat from it. So obviously, even though this year I touched the mace the day before, it's not a problem, but he'll be wrong, because this year he touched it when he was Jewish already, and therefore he has Tumas Shiva, he has to have Paraduma water. In order to prevent mistakes like that from happening, we give him the full status of Tumah anytime he converted, whether he touched Tumah or he didn't touch Tumah. There's an automatic Tumah that applies. That way he will not find himself in a situation where he will assume that he's allowed to eat from the carbon and he is really not, based on this mistake. That's Beis Hillel's shita, and that obviously doesn't apply to somebody who's Jewish but has a bris milah now, because if he's tamei now, he's tamei for sure, and if he's not tamei, then there's no reason that he would learn to make a mistake the next year. And Beis Shammai is not concerned for any of these gzeros, and they say no, it's fine, it's not a problem. Okay, now the Gemara quotes Rava, who says there's a list of 6 things, 6 isurei derabanan that come into conflict, most of them with carbon Pesach, but all of them with kares of some sort. And the Gemara says 3 of them, the Rabbanan allowed their Isser to interfere with the kares mitzvah. They took it away the kares mitzvah because of their concern with Rabbanan, and 3 of them they did not. So 2 of them we've seen so far. We've seen already that the Orel, that's somebody who is converting and has a bris milah now, and Beis Hillel says that he's not allowed to eat from the carbon, even though technically he should be okay midaraisa because he just converted and he's not tamei. Beis Hillel applies a rabbinic tumah on him lest he make a mistake the next year. That's one case where a concern, a gzeira derabanan, blocks this person from eating the carbon Pesach at all. An example that we've seen already where the Chazal did not allow their gzeira to interfere is by the oinin. He has a status of aninas derabanan at night, but they took that off to allow him to eat from the carbon Pesach. Now, the other examples are as follows. Rava says, Hazah, somebody who's tamei and wants to have parduma water sprinkled on him, but his 7th day or 3rd day falls on a Shabbos. There is a gzeira derabanan, it's asur derabanan to sprinkle parduma water on somebody, for sure on the 7th day, when it's a Shabbos, because you're completing him, you're fixing him, you're removing him from a status of tumah to a status of tahara that's asur derabanan. Now, if you don't allow him to do it, it could come out that he's going to miss bringing the carbon Pesach b'zmanai. The Gemara says, yes, this is a situation where we allow our gzeira derabanan on Hilchos Shabbos to prevent him from being able to bring the carbon Pesach. The next example is about bris milah, and the situation is where you have somebody who wants to bring a carbon Pesach, but there is a child on the 8th day in his household, an Eved or something, maybe a son, who requires a bris milah. Now the halacha is that the father is not allowed to eat from the carbon Pesach, or the master is not allowed to, as long as there's somebody in the household who requires the bris. The thing is, the bris falls out on Shabbos. Now you're allowed to do a bris on Shabbos when it's on the 8th day. The problem is that in order to do it, he has to bring the knife, and he has to bring it through a rabbinical area, to bring it through a Carmelist or something, which is asur derabanan, to bring from one rishos to another. It could be even from rishos yachad to rishos yachad, according to some opinions, which is asur midirabanan, or if there's no way of chatzeres, also midirabanan. So all these situations, you have a case where you need to violate an Isur Derabanan Hilchos Shabbos in order to be able to do a bris milah, in order to allow somebody to bring the carbon Pesach. Rashi points out it can't be referring to the bris of the guy himself, because if he's an adult, then you can't do it on Shabbos because it's bris shalei b'zmanei, and if he's a child, there's no kares involved. So it's got to be that it's a master and he has to do a milah on his eved. Either way, the Chazal said you are not allowed to bring the knife through a rabbinical Isser zone, even though it'll cause you to miss bringing Karban Pesach Bismane. Now the Gemara brings an example of two situations in which Chazal did not allow an Isser Darbanan to interfere. And the first example is a Mitzayra. This is a person who has Taras. On the 8th day of his Taras, he should be able to come stand in the doorway of the Azara in Shar Nikanor, put his hand into the Azara. The Kohen will put blood on his thumbs. That will be Matayar him. He can complete the process, and then he can bring the Karban Pesach that day if it's Erev Pesach, and he could eat that night. He should be able to do that. Problem with this Mitzayra, what happened is he became a Balkari. He had a seminal emission on his 8th day. The halacha is then he can't go stand next to Shar Nikanor, or in Shar Nikanor, because he's a Balkari. Balkari is Aser Midrabanan to enter Har HaBayis. Therefore he can't do the whole procedure, and he'll end up being a Mitzayra throughout the entire Pesach and their Pesach night, and he will not be able to bring the Karban Pesach. On this, Chazal said he's allowed. We say we will push away the Isser Darabana of a Balkari going into the Har HaBayis, allow him to stand at Shar Nikanor in order that he not lose the mitzvah of Karban Pesach, which carries karis. The Gemara just proves that Balkari in the Har HaBayis is an Isser Darabanan, because we have a Mishnah that seems to call it a lav. The Gemara says it's not really a lav, it's an Isser Darabanan. Rav Yechanan explains, and he proves it from a pasuk in Divrei Yam, which says, "Vayamid Yoshavet B'Kal Yehuda V'Yushalayim B'Veis Hashem Lifnei HaChatzer HaChadasha." What's a Chatzer Chadasha? The new courtyard. It's the courtyard that had a chiddush, had a new halacha. The Chazal made it into an Isser Darabanan for a Balkari to go there. But again, for the Mitzayra, they took it off in order that he'd be allowed to complete his procedure. The last example is the Beis HaPras. Beis HaPras is a field that contained a dead body in it, but it was plowed under. And now the bones are scattered all over the place, and a kohen can't walk through there because he might become tummy. Now, midaraisa, you could assume that there are no pieces large enough to be matame him, and that they're spread out, and he's not going to be walking on it. However, the Rabbanan made it forbidden to walk through a Beis HaPras. So Gemara says, in order for him to be able to bring the Karban Pesach, we allow it. He just has to try to do the best he can to make sure that he doesn't step on anything tamei. He should blow the field in front of him. If there's a large bone, it'll be uncovered by his blowing. If there's a small bone, it'll get blown out of the way. The Gemara quotes another opinion here. Rav Yehuda Bar Abai says the name of Rav Yehuda that he should wait until it gets stomped on. If a lot of people walked on it, then we'll allow it because we can assume that whatever tumah is there was crushed. Okay, that's the end of the 8th parak of Maseches Pesachim. Now we begin the 9th parak. The 9th parak discusses situations where somebody was pater from a Karban Pesach. He was one of 4 things that says he doesn't have to bring the first Karban, but he does have to bring the Pesach Sheni. The Gemara will get into what if he managed to bring the Pesach Rishon anyway. Is it work for him or does it not work for him? And some other attendant halachos here. So first of all, we see the Mishnah. The Mishnah says the classic examples mentioned in the Psukim, if somebody brings the Pesach Sheni, is somebody who was Tamei on Erev Pesach, or he was too far away. He was B'derech HaChoika. He was not able to get to Yerushalayim on time for the Shechita of the Karban Pesach. So the Mishnah uses the following language. It says, if somebody was Tamei, or he was too far away, and he didn't do the Karban Pesach, that's key that it says that, and he didn't do the Karban Pesach, so he should do a Pesach Sheni. Then the Mishnah adds 2 more cases. The Mishnah adds, if he was a Shogig, he forgot that today is Erev Pesach, or he was an Eine, some other unsurmountable obstacle was preventing him from doing it, and the same phrase, V'lo yasas rishon, and he didn't do the first Karban, then he should do again Pesach Sheni. So the Mishnah now says a cryptic line, says, if so, why does it say Tamei or B'derech HaChoika? Because these have kares and these don't have kares. The Gemara is going to have a hard time with this because all 4 of these should not have kares. They all have a good reason. The Gemara will say that there are actually 2 hidden cases that are referred to in the Mishnah, which we will have to explain it. So before we get into all of that, the Gemara quotes Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes. What happens if somebody was B'derech HaChoika? He was far away, and he couldn't make it back to Yerushalayim on time to shecht or be there for the shechita of the Karban Pesach. However, he'll get there by nightfall. So what if a group counted him in their group? They were mazakim with a piece of their Karban Pesach, and they shechted for him. So a Karban Pesach was done for him, even though he was pater, he was B'derech HaChoika. Does it count for him, or does it not count for him? So the Gemara says, Rav Nachman says, yeah, it counts. It counts. He has a special leniency. He could do Pesach Sheni. That's not meant to prevent him from doing Pesach Rishon. That's just meant to give him a second choice. If he managed to do Pesach Rishon, even though he was B'derech HaChoika and he couldn't get there in the entire Erev Pesach, it's good. Says Rav Sheshes, not true. The Torah took it away from him. He doesn't have Pesach Rishon. How do I know? He's like a Tameh. Just like a Tameh can't do Carbon Rishon, Derech HaChoka that put together also cannot do Derech Rishon. Okay, now each man Yamar is going to try to show their opinion, and this is going to help us iron out what exactly our Mishnah is referring to. Rav Nachman says, I get my proof from our Mishnah. The Mishnah says, somebody who was Tameh, or B'derech HaChoka, V'loi Asas Rishon, and he didn't do the first carbon, he does it the second time. That shows that if he did do it the first time, then he has no reason to do Pesach Sheni. He did Pesach Rishon, okay, no problem. So that's a proof to me that the Tameh or someone who's B'derech HaChoka and he managed to do it, he should be okay, he doesn't have to do Pesach Sheni. So Gemara says, Rav Sheshes says, well then, if you think that line in the Mishnah that says, and he didn't do it, means that had he somehow managed to do it, he'd be okay, wouldn't have to do Pesach Sheni, then how do you understand the second half of the Mishnah, where it speaks about a Shogeg or an Oinus? You're going to say that it means to say that a Shogeg or an Oinus who managed to do it doesn't have to bring a carbon Pesach Sheni? How's a Shogeg or Oinus managed to do it? He's a Shogeg or Oinus. The point is that he was Shogeg or Oinus and he couldn't do it. There's no situation in which he's a Shogeg or Oinus and he manages somehow. Can't happen. Says Rav Sheshes, you have to say that the phrase Vilay Asa is not telling you that the person that was listed, the Shogeg or the Oinus, and also in the Reisha, the Tameh or the B'derech HaChoka, it's not telling you that they didn't do it. It's referring to a third type of person in the Reisha and a third type of person in the Seifa. In the Reisha, it's referring to an Oinain who didn't do it, and in the Seifa, it's referring to a Mezid who didn't do it. And that's what it means, so therefore you have no proof, because that's not how you read it at all. The Oinain is called a Vilay Asa, and the Mezid is called a Vilay Asa. Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi says, I'll point out to you that this is true, this is the accurate explanation, because then the Mishnah goes ahead and it says, these get kares and these don't get kares. Now let me ask you, which ones listed in the Mishnah explicitly get kares? Tameh, Derech HaChoka, Shogeg, or an Oinus? None of them. So who's the Mishnah talking about when it says, these get kares? Must be talking about the two, the Vilay Asas. One is an Oinen, and one is a Mezid. Those two have no excuse. They could have brought it, and therefore they get kares for skipping the carbon Pesach Rishon that they were supposed to do. Now, how's Rav Nachman, who brought a proof from this Mishnah, how's he going to answer all this? So Gemara says he learns as follows. The Vilay Asa in the Seifa, where it said a Shogeg or an Oinus, it says, and a Vilay Asa, you're right, that's a third person. That's a Vilay Asa. And who's that? That's the Mezid. And when the Mishnah says that these are Chayiv Kares, it's referring to that Mezid. I was to say these, plural, as if there's only one. Meaning Rav Nachman is saying the Vilay Asa in the Reisha, your time is referring to an Ayin, is not true. It's referring to what I said. It's referring to the fact that the Derech HaChoka did not do it. And if he would have done it, he'd be okay. The one in the Seifa, that is the third person, you're right. But that third person is the Mezid. And that third person, if he didn't do it, gets kares, and that's what the Mishnah was referring to when it says these get kares. Well, why does it say plural? It says plural because everything in the Mishnah up to now is a plural. We said patur, and we said that these people are pater. So we said these are chayiv. Not because there's a these, there's really only one of them, it's just a mezid. But we used a parallel language because that's what the Gemara will do often. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know the source of Rav Sheshes' halacha. Rav Sheshes again had held that if somebody's b'derech HaChoka and they do it for him, he manages to be included in a carbon Pesach anyway, it's no good, it's cancelled. Where does he get that from? So Rav Sheshes says, get a brisa, it's quoted by Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says a Tameh and a Derech HaChoka go together. Just like a Tameh could do it, but the Torah said no. A Derech HaChoka is also somebody who could do it, could be somebody who could do it, and the Torah said no. Even if somehow he could do it, although he's far, he could do it, the Torah still says no. The Torah still blocks him, no, your carbon does not count, just like the Tameh. So Gemara says, what's Rav Nachman going to answer? Rav Nachman says, that's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Rabbi Akiva holds that anybody who was out of the zone, anybody who couldn't do a carbon Pesach at the time that it was brought, at the time of the Shechita, can't show up at night and say, now I'm good, I could do it now. Classic example of that is somebody has Tumas Sheretz, he goes to the mikvah, he only becomes tar when the sun comes down. So during the time of Shechita, he was Tameh. So Rabbi Akiva holds, you can't come now and say, oh, I'm tar by nightfall, I'm included. There's no such thing, we can't include you, you have to be ready to time of Shechita. So this guy is b'derech HaChoka, the only case in which this makes sense, his whole discussion is if he manages to get to Yerushalayim by nightfall. That way he could eat. Otherwise, what does he have to do with this? And still, so Rabbi Akiva, he of course says that the derech rechoika cannot be involved. That's because Rabbi Akiva holds that even though he gets there at night, the Torah says no. The Torah says no, you can't show up now. But we don't pass like Rabbi Akiva. We pass that the guy who has Tumas Sheretz could go to the mikvah and he could eat at night. So we'll also pass that the guy who has a b'derech rechoika could come just before nightfall, even though he wasn't in Yerushalayim at the time of Shechita.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.